May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. The sower's task has changed a bit over the years. In the field next to me, an afternoon will come in late March when there's a lot of rumbling and whirring and a huge cloud of dust. It all happens too fast to see what's going on. I suspect it's ploughing, sowing and reaping happening all at once. But within a few weeks the fair golden corn is waving and all is well. I can report that it's about 3 feet shorter at the very edge of the crop, so we can add to Jesus' parable that you shouldn't let the seed fall too close to a vicarage. It may be that this is the most important of Jesus' parables. Certainly he gave it extra prominence by adding the explanation to it, which he doesn't do with any of the other ones. He just leaves people to it. Like all the parables, of course, it's a kind of teaching, but like all the parables, also it's not direct. It doesn't give new information. It just allows the hearer to say, "Ah, yes, I see that now." Jesus is showing them something perhaps they knew already without realizing it, and then they can make it their own. So what's this parable all about? When I was a child, they told us it was about the spread of the gospel. Missionaries going out into the dark places of the world, hoping for the right conditions for the message to spread. That's a plausible account as far as it goes. It allows the missionaries to blame the natives if their preaching doesn't get through. But of course that explanation doesn't tell the whole story. When Jesus was speaking, for a start, the church hadn't yet set up any missions. It was just Jesus going around addressing the crowd, sending words out into the air and letting them go. He didn't do anything to check they'd got the point. He didn't ram things home. He just spoke and moved on. And you can tell from the parable what his reasons behind this were. He knew that the message would only take root in those who were predisposed to receive it. He knew that the message would only take root in those predisposed to receive it. This is my first point. Yes, this is going to be a classic Anglican 3-point sermon. This is my first point. If the message goes out, it seems to be a matter for the hearer whether or not it's going to be received. Now this, of course, is not what the church has been telling us down the ages. So, are we let off the hook? Can we stop doing mission? Just say if the Christian message doesn't lodge in the minds of those who hear it, then that's not our problem. Can we just sit back and take it easy? Well, as with all the best questions, the answer, of course, is yes and no. You've heard me say before that you mustn't try and argue people into accepting the faith. That has never, ever worked. It may be that the message will come from what we are, how we live, how we behave towards others. It may be from our lives that the message will get through to people rather than from anything we say. But, and here we move towards the second point, the parable does contrast rich soil with shallow soil and dry soil. Might not a good farmer make sure the ground is prepared? If it's our job to spread a message, how should we be giving the seeds a chance to survive? Is it our job to do so? Well, there are ways of doing this with genuine seeds. Some need to be nicked. Some need to be sown just before a bout of really cold weather. And you might say that the sower in the parable just might have thought of preparing the ground a little better, or sowing the seed a little more carefully, or indeed watering them in. What role should we be taking, if any, in preparing the ground? I'll come back to that on Sunday the 2nd of August, I promise that, because my third point, and one which will occupy us for 2 weeks more, our lectionary continues these parables, so the question will be with us for a few weeks yet. Third point is this: what is this seed that the sower is sowing? What is the subject of the parable in the first place? If it was your job to go out and proclaim the word of the kingdom in this age, in these villages, what would you say? What would you say? We've been through some of the possible words over recent weeks. How about come in and be saved? Well, that's all fine and dandy, and that's certainly what Jesus went about doing. It's there in our repertory, it's nice and biblical. But we've seen, first of all, that it really does put people off like nothing else. And secondly, it is most definitely context specific. Needing to be saved involves something from which you need to be saved. And that may well be different in everybody's case. You may have to work quite hard to persuade some people they need to be saved. Harder still, to persuade them to be grateful for your offer. And it may be, of course, also that others quite genuinely have been saved already. The one I mentioned last week was the good news, and I could see how excited you were when I talked about that. You could go out and announce to the world that there is good news for the world. Well, as we saw last week, it's not always so easy to say quite what the good news might be. Tell people they'll live forever, and they'll likely ask you, is it compulsory? Good news is central to the Christian proclamation. There's no doubt about that, but heaven help you if you try to be specific about it. Well, I'm reaching the point where I'm going to finish for this week, and I'm going to leave you not with an answer, not even with a question, but with a mystery, quite literally with a mystery. You know how Anthony tells us that the disciples weren't necessarily the sharpest knives in the drawer. Well, that certainly seems to be true of Matthew, who wrote today's Gospel. In its wisdom, the Anglican Church has left a couple of verses out of the passage we used in this service. If we'd left them in, we'd have heard the disciples asking Jesus, "Why do you speak in parables?" And Jesus replies, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. But to them, to the crowd, it has not been given. To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven." To know the secrets. The word translated secrets in Greek is mysteria, the mysteries. Mysteries in Greek means something slightly different from what it means in English. Mysteries mean things into which one has been initiated, things about which one might have to take an oath of silence. Matthew says the disciples know the mysteries. Why I say that Matthew is getting this wrong is that he's copying St. Mark's Gospel. He's copying it as best he can. But remember that Matthew followed Mark, and then Luke followed Matthew, and Matthew embellished Mark, added and subtracted. Sometimes he added things which he think people might not quite understand in Mark. He tried to clarify things a bit. Also, clearly, sometimes he just didn't understand things himself. And this is a case in point. What Mark, which Matthew had in front of him when he was writing his gospel, what Mark says in his passage is not, "To you has been given to know the secrets," but quite literally, "To you has been given initiation into the kingdom of heaven." Not knowing what the secrets are, not just understanding the odd parable, but entry, membership, being an insider. I'm not saying this is an exact parable, but being a doctor of philosophy, being a hospital consultant, being a member of the House of Lords, these are very different things from just having studied and knowing about things. It's Matthew who's used this word, to know. What Mark says about being initiated is much more, so much more. It's central for the disciples. It's everything. They are already members of the kingdom of heaven. They're already standing where the angels wish to stand. They're insiders. The Christian faith has been blighted by three inventions of Matthew's gospel. Matthew's gospel alone. First, you'll only find this in Matthew, the suggestion that the Christian church was ever subject to the Jewish law. Secondly, Matthew's insistence that eternal punishment and gnashing of teeth are in store for the wicked. And thirdly, the idea that the kingdom of heaven is reserved for those who have died. Being a member of the kingdom of heaven doesn't mean you've died and gone to heaven. The disciples are part of it already, and they are still very much alive. The life of heaven begins amongst the earthly realities, or it doesn't begin at all. The life of heaven begins amidst these earthly realities, or it doesn't begin at all. It's a matter of trust, of being willing to go down into the depths and find it there. So, Matthew's Gospel has cast a heavy shadow over the Christian faith for 2,000 years. We know that the church for which he wrote it died out in the 3rd century AD. That tells its own story. It's in the Gospels of Luke, and above all, John, and in the members of the communities of Luke and John who are our ancestors in the faith. It's there that the church found its future. But that's another point. Where we are now is the realization that what Jesus actually said to his 12 disciples was this: they had already been initiated into the kingdom of heaven. Just them, not the crowds. What does that mean for Jesus' disciples in the 21st century? Next week, same time, same place.